This session is Regen on the High Street. How can hospitality embrace regen farming? We've got a fantastic panel, but before I go into them, I just want to sort of lay the scene. This is very tough and complex for the hospitality sector, and it is not just about healthy soil and carbon. Regen farming is suffering from a lack of definition. There's a risk of greenwashing, and we're going to be framing the discussion today around what you can see on the screen. And this is a slide from FAIR, and Max will introduce his company there. And it's showing you that on the right-hand side of your screen, you see the 6 outcomes, and on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the 4 pillars, which are the sort of 4 challenges that need to be addressed. So we're gonna keep this on screen because it's very easy to get sidetracked into one issue. So this is the framing that we've got. So when you're thinking about questions, try and think about them within this sort of framework. Hospitality here, what we're meaning, we're covering caterers, so they do the catering within public sector, schools, offices, etc., through to restaurants, quick serve restaurants, hotels, independent chains, and some people term this the out-of-home consumption as well. So further ado, into the panelists, we've got Mike Hanson from a large hospitality catering restaurant company. We've got Paul Doheny, who's an international banker, creating financial incentives for companies to use Regen Ag in their supply chains. Max Boucher, the author of the FAIR report, that we're using to frame this discussion. Cindie, who's a European entrepreneur encouraging regen farmers and hospitality to work together. And Bob, who's running a network of hospitalities and restaurants, very keen to educate his members on Regen Ag. So I'm going to allow each panelist to introduce themselves and what their organization does. They've got about 4 minutes maximum each, and I'm going to be really tough. Why you're here at Groundswell, what your organization is doing in Regen Ag, and what's driving your organization to do that. So we're going to start with you, Max, if that's okay, because your report's going to be framing the discussion. So over to you, please.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Max, and I lead the Biodiversity and Oceans Research and Engagement at FAIR. FAIR is an investor network. We have more than 400 members right now that are global financial institutions. And we're not in the business of telling anyone how to invest. We're really here to act as a forum to help them understand the food sector. What are the challenges that the sector is facing in terms of sustainability, and what are some of the opportunities that are arising? And as part of the work that we do with investors, we do connect a lot with companies, and we try to support them in changing the way that they're approaching their value chains. And one thing that I'm going to start by saying actually is that, hands up, I'm probably the person in this entire festival who knows the least about farming and regenerative agriculture. But I did hear that a lot from corporations over the last few years, saying, hey, we have a solution to our carbon footprint, we have a solution to biodiversity, water risk, it's regenerative agriculture. And after a while I started thinking, okay, well, we need to figure out what's behind this, and is there actually like a big opportunity there? Is this kind of huge seismic change that is happening? And that's what led to this report. So we were thinking, first let's figure out, is it something that's genuinely happening? So we looked at 79 of the biggest food corporations that are listed in the food sector in the world. And we found that, actually 50 of these companies talk about regenerative agriculture as an opportunity, and they together actually account for 85% of the revenue of these companies. And you're looking at about $3 trillion of revenue every year. A big part of that goes towards obviously sourcing ingredients and so on. So yes, it is actually a huge opportunity in terms of money that could support regenerative transitions. But then we started thinking, okay, well, what is there a kind of definition by consensus that's emerging here? And we started thinking, okay, well, let's look at what they're trying to regenerate. Take it simple. And that's what the first chart is on this slide there, where we saw that there isn't really a consensus, but what we see is that a lot of companies come at this from a carbon angle, and then they start looking at things like water resilience, and they start looking at biodiversity. Then you have agrochemicals, which was a little bit of a mystery to me, because it's not necessarily an outcome in itself, but sure, we accounted it because we, again, as I said, we're really agnostic going into this and really wanted to base ourselves on what companies are saying. And finally, we found that improving farmers' livelihoods was actually only kind of discussed by about half the companies. So that was really the sort of first thing we did, and we thought, okay, what's the actual ambition behind this? And we found that out of these 50 companies, 18 had quantified any kind of target. And in the financial world, a target is kind of important because you want to be able to check in with companies, how they're progressing, and make sure that you're not just kind of going in a big circle for 5 years and realize you haven't achieved anything. So targets are quite important. We found only 18 companies have got targets. And then we started thinking, okay, well, where's the money coming from for this? And we found that only 4 of these companies actually want to support or have aligned a meaningful amount of money towards a regenerative transition or supply chains. And all in all, that led to the 4 questions that you see on the left side, I think, of the slide. I can't see it from here. And that's really the sort of genesis for our involvement in regenerative agriculture.
Thank you, Max. Next up, Mike, the hospitality industry's approach.
Thank you very much. Amazing to be here. This is only my second year at Groundswell, so completely privileged to be on a panel. So WSH is a large hospitality business, independently run still. WSH is not really the front-facing brand. The main brands you may recognise will be Baxter Story, Benugo, CSEs, Caterlink, Holroyd Howe, right across from catering the workplace, boardrooms, we've got venues, museums, restaurants, bars, you name it, we do it. But each of those is independent. So it's quite a unique style of business in that we are very entrepreneurial, independently run, and quite flexible. So I started out we started our sustainability journey in 2006. So we've been at this a long time. So I was doing that part-time I'm an operator, a catering operator, so I was a chef many years ago. So I moved into sustainability then, went full-time in 2012. So regenerative agriculture is really a significant part of our goals to reduce our environmental impact, whether that's carbon sequestration, reducing carbon impacts, reducing methane, etc. But also we have nature targets as well. So it's an amazing area to get into and really focus. Some of the talks I've been to are really inspiring, and we are just, and pun absolutely intended, we are hungry to get that regenerative product into our business and give to our customers to help reduce our emissions, but also reduce all our other impacts, create resilience against climate change, etc. So yeah, fantastic to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Paul, let's look at the macro level financing.
So I'm going to give Max a run for his money in terms of knowledge on regenerative agriculture. My background, coming from the banking side, I head up the corporate clients and lending for Rabobank in the UK. For those of you who don't know Rabobank, typically when I say Rabobank, they think of the cycling team, or my dad calls it Rambo Bank. So it's not really a household name really known in the UK, but what people don't realize is Rabobank in the UK actually touches about 85% of the food sold here through the relationships we have with the across the supply chain. Rabobank is a Dutch cooperative bank, farmer owned still, internationally focuses on food and agri, and with an element now going into the energy transition space that is separate from the conversation today. Globally, we lend about 115 billion into food and agri. About 60 billion of that goes into the rural side. We're active in 37 countries with a concentration of the top 5 being the Netherlands, Brazil, the US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. In the UK, we have a portfolio of about 6 billion, clients of about 70, and I focus more on the wholesale side. So what do we do in terms of regenerative agriculture, more broadly sustainability? Rabobank has a mantra of growing a better world together. And one of the thesis and things that we're very conscious of is the need by 2050 to feed 10 billion mouths. And that's going to require about a 60% increase in the production of food than what we have today. To be able to feed the world sustainably, the current way we believe that we produce and consume food has to change. The reliance on the system has been developed, say, back in the 1920s in terms of mechanization, intensive use of chemicals and specialization in terms of the crops that are produced does need to change. Now, we believe that that needs to change over time. It's not going to be a flick of the switch, and it's going to take more than one solution. There's going to be some dilemmas on the way, some of which we'll get into a bit today. But Rabobank, as a cooperative bank with farmers at its roots, is willing and able and has proven capabilities to help our clients on the wholesale side, but also on the rural side in terms of future-proofing that food system and working collaboratively across the supply chain in order to get to that. We do that in a number of different ways. So broadly speaking, there's maybe 3 ways in which we enable regenerative agriculture. There's direct lending. We go directly to the farmer in those countries where we're retail focused. That's sometimes done in collaboration with others, like McCain, for example, if anyone follows what they do there in terms of the regenerative agriculture program and lending directly to farmers at a discount from Rabobank. You can do it in a more structured way with platforms like supply chain financing or more structured solutions. We'll get onto them a bit later in terms of what they are. Again, collaboration being at the core of what you do there and getting that financing to the farmer in the most efficient way possible. And then finally, enablers. Enablers can really mean anything. We've got a number of different initiatives, like, for instance, Food Bites, which is an online collaboration platform whereby new startups, and particularly a lot in regenerative agriculture, can set themselves up on that platform, put themselves up in the spotlight for companies to collaborate with them, invest in them, give them technical expertise, and it's just a collaborative way of bringing people together. Or if it's more from a enabling perspective in terms of financial incentives, we run something called Acorn, which is a agroforestry program primarily aimed at developing countries and providing farmers with carbon credits to develop agriculture and farming practices and then sell those. We'd have a lot of off-takers like Microsoft, Lavazza and others that would purchase those credits. I think it's about 80 or 90% of those credits go directly back to the farmer as well to help the production system. That's it from me.
Thank you, Paul. Now, Cindie. Cindie's coming at it from a microfinance level and other angles as well.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll work on that, right? We yeah. Okay. So, but I'm Cindie. I'm from Denmark. We use the majority of our land in Denmark for agriculture, mostly feeding animals. And when you are Danish, you will be rooted in agriculture somehow because your grandparents, parents, so on, are probably in agriculture. The same goes for me. My parents, my grandparents, my uncles, everything are rooted in the conventional agriculture. And I said at the previous panel is like we have very interesting dinners and summer lunches and events because, of course, this discussion can be heated and it is very complex these days. I am at this panel today because I have founded and I'm leading a non-profit organization called Footprint Nordic. That is a hospitality-led organization. Where we work with restaurants, cafe, wholesalers, and canteens. The thing is, right now, nobody wants to pay for the crisis, right? So how do we actually do that? And in Footprint Nordic, we work with what we call collective regeneration. And that means that hospitality, they add, or our members in hospitality, they add 1% to the guest bill. So consumers are paying 1% extra when they go into Footprint Nordic members. That means that farmers can then apply for grant in Footprint Nordic. We have different criteria, of course, but we try to make it very easy for farmers to apply for these funds. And it does enable like consumers or everybody who is buying or selling food to be part of the transition that we believe is necessary right now. It also, of course, is an opportunity for the companies that are part of Footprint Nordic to actually work directly with the producers. Because what it often happens when you start to add 1% is like, oh, where are the producers? How can we meet them? Can we actually get the supply into our restaurant and so on? So it's really about bringing hospitality together with the producers. Right now, I also believe very much on that this capital is needed. It might be microfinancing, yes, but it's still needed in the system because we want to see the pioneering farmers do all these new things, but there's no money for this. We need so much testing out there, and it might be smaller projects, but we still need it. And that's where it's really tricky right now for the farmers to do these things. And while it's microfinancing,
Sorry,
I will also say that we are also in the US, we are also in Asia with many restaurants on board, which is also opening up for grants, governmental grants, and so on. So this is a way of engaging in the conversation with hospitality, but it's not like, of course, there needs to be all other kind of finances behind it. Okay, I think that was for me.
Thank you. I don't think I better use that word again. Over to you, Bob, on your network.
Thank you, Katie. I'm Bob. I work for Zero Carbon Forum. We are a collaboration of the hospitality sector. So we've got about 65 members operating around 35,000 sites. So it's about a third of the sector. We've written a roadmap to net zero, which includes targets to be net zero across all scopes by 2040, so aligned with NFU. And we've done some work on our footprints and some benchmarks that tell us that more than 50% of the sector's footprint is in the production of food and drink. So we will not reach net zero if we do not address the emissions in our supply chain associated with the production of food and drink. So to Mike's point, there's huge appetite for regenerative. We know this is a lever that will enable us to build resilience and reduce our emissions. But I think it's worth setting some context, and there are very much two sides to the coin. The first side is it's bloody hard at the moment. In the wake of Brexit, COVID, cost of living crisis, energy crisis, raising national living wage, there's just so many pressures on the sector. There are many, many operators who are really struggling. And any increase in cost is just not acceptable. I heard a phrase recently from one of our operators that has really stuck with me, and I'll use it, is we don't want to be the shiniest ship on the bottom of the ocean. Staying afloat is absolutely the number one priority. Once we've got that nailed, then we can get the ship shiny. But if we're shining our ship as the water's coming in and we're not applying that resource that we do have to bailing out, then we're being fools. So there's a very, very real set of pressures on the sector. The flip side of that, of course, is, as Mike says, huge appetite. I just want to kind of quickly tell you a quick story to demonstrate the speed at which we're traveling and the extent to which the sector is embracing regenerative. So around 3 years ago, Pizza Pilgrims put wild farmed flour into one of their restaurants in Selfridges. They were running a bunch of experiments and things they could do to be more sustainable, and they put wild farmed flour into one restaurant. That's still true today, but they haven't expanded beyond that. Just recently, Ask Italian, part of the Azzurri group, have committed to put 100% wild farmed flour into 100% of dough in all of their restaurants. That's across 3 years. Everyone was talking about the Pizza Pilgrim example 3 years ago because it was innovative and it was new and it was progressive. Today, it feels like a drop in the ocean when you look at some of the moves that other businesses are taking. So I think kind of from a hospitality perspective, I think the summary is keen appetite for this, but lots of challenges ahead of us.
And what a great segue, because the next question is about challenges. But we don't want to spend too long on the challenges because there's been a lot of that going on over the last day or two. So I'm only going to let each panelist give me one challenge. And you can't repeat the challenge if it's been said already. And then we're going to move on to solutions. So who wants to go first? Max, do you want to go?
Sure. So I guess my challenge is on the screen, but the one that I really want to focus on here is creating these long-term financial incentives for farmers to farm sustainably and deliver the ecosystem services that we all depend on. I think, here we're all kind of converted to these things, but if you want to get a movement that will grab and collect all the farmers, or at least a substantial number of farmers in the UK and around the world, there needs to be a benefit to it, and not just a sort of one-off payment. It needs to be something that tops up revenues every single year for the foreseeable future.
Okay. Paul?
Yeah, so for me, it's the consumer, and it's quite varied in what I mean by that, but there is a bit of a... We have to accept that you need to get the consumer on board. You need to win the hearts and minds of the consumer because ultimately, well, perceived or not, there's going to be a higher cost associated with this. And if you look at some of the surveys you see right now in terms of some of the charities and the issues that families have lower down the socioeconomic ladder in terms of just feeding their family, we put additional costs on that, that's quite difficult. So we need to be quite careful about that. There's quite an education piece, and there's a journey to go on that in terms of the acceptance of what we need to do in terms of the food system and the production around that. We can't just think that we can flick a switch with that and change it overnight. That's going to take some time, and you need to, like I said, win the hearts and minds.
Okay, so we've had farmer financing, we've had sensitivity around pricing and winning consumers. Cindie, what have you got for us?
Yes, would love to touch about the consumers and the pricing, but that's going to be after then. Okay, so I want to focus a little bit on a maybe country-specific challenge that we see in hospitality right now, and that is coming from Denmark. We have a very strong organic association, and it's a state-controlled certification. And for many companies right now in hospitality, they have made these targets towards organic certified produce. While when we talk about regenerative farming, we see very diverse farms, right? These diverse farms, they often don't fit into the certifications, which makes it very difficult actually for them to enter the hospitality sector. So there's something about being very aware of when we talk about certifications, because that is also what we talk a lot about in the space these days. And for hospitality to keep that in mind when we talk about certifications, because the whole sector is changing right now. So if we lock us into specific certifications, I'm afraid that it will lead to difficulties to actually transition the supply chains. Something to consider.
Do you know how many farms relatively are under that certification system?
No, we are launching soon a project called Top 50 Farmers, where we hopefully will have a lot of data. But what we see in Foodprint Nordic is that less and less farmers also want to be certified, and it's creating a new conversation about certifications, and it does makes it a little bit challenging right now.
Okay, Mike, what's yours?
I mentioned earlier we have a huge appetite for Regen product for lots of reasons, not just for carbon, but also for, excuse me, for the nutritional benefits, for supporting nature, soil quality, all of the main 6 outcomes, and 7, 8, 9, 10 of the different outcomes that come from using Regen Ag. The main challenge for us is availability. So it's actually quite straightforward. It's route to market. And how do we get product from the farm, from these amazing farmers that are here today and all over the country, and actually get that product into our business? Often we need to work with a wholesaler. We needed some wheels to get the product to us. We need a way of getting the amazing oilseed rape actually cold pressed into rapeseed oil so we can use it in our business. We can't take rapeseed. We don't do that. So I think that is the main challenge for us. Is availability, and obviously related to that, route to market.
I'm just going to ask a little bit more on that. How advanced are the wholesalers in their discussions and thinking on this with you?
I would say they're getting there. I mean, we did a lot of work, and I'm proud to say that as a business, we actually made the initial introductions for Wild Farmed into Bidfood, which is one of the largest wholesalers. And since then, and it's almost like proof of concept, it's just taken off. And it's now in virtually every food service provider. It's in lots of restaurants, because actually that has been shown that has worked. And Craig, who is now head of food service for Wild Farmed, has amazing relationships with all of the catering, all of the food service providers, and it's delivering, that product into the mainstream market.
Okay, I think we'll touch on a bit more of that on the solution side. Bob, what's your final challenge?
Yeah, I totally agree with that on availability, and I also agree with that in terms of better relationships and better awareness. I think for me, it's turning that really strong qualitative narrative into a quantitative narrative. So if we think about how a hospitality business is going to make a decision about whether or not it wants to put regenerative produce into its onto its menu, that is a quantifiable decision that a boardroom will make. So typically in a boardroom will look at, well, what is this thing going to cost me? What's my return within 4 years? How are we quantifying the impact we're going to have with regenerative, and whether or not that will solve the problem? So if a food company is experiencing risk and volatility in their supply chain, can we quantify the extent to which regenerative agriculture will reduce that risk? Can we quantify the extent to which it will reduce emissions, so that anyone who's set a target to net zero can then say, well, if I make this investment into this produce, then I know I'll reduce my emissions by this much. And without that data, it's going to be really hard for a boardroom to look at those figures and say, yeah, I'll make a decision. Some of it's emotional, and you'll get some of that at some level, but really, without quantification, we're not going to get to scale.
Okay, so we've got financing for the farmer, consumer education, slightly touching on price as well, and what the consumers can take with us on this journey, and we don't want to alienate them. Challenges around certification and unwritten consequences of certification. Route to market, the opportunity that wholesalers can present, and then data for the boards so that they can assess the risks that they're facing and reduce those risks. So we've got those challenges. We're now going to move on to solutions. Everybody on the panel is involved in some solution of some sort. So they're going to be sharing their experiences. If you can, when you're talking about your solutions, if you can perhaps tie them back to one of the challenges we've touched on, that would be helpful for the audience. If not, you'll have to knit it together. So, Cindie, would you like to go first?
I can start. To touch upon one of the challenges too, I talked about the certifications, but we also have to acknowledge that the regenerative word in itself in hospitality is still unknown for many. And so while we offer this collective action possibility where restaurants, for example, they use their platform for a force of good, you couldn't say, and then bring in the consumers, paying this one extra % is one solution to getting money into the farmer system where we don't find it right now. But what's also happening when you add this 1% is like the restaurant gets really involved in, like, as I said before, where do we get the produce from? So in the end, it's also about the education. It's about the awareness of Regen Ag. So I do think we provide like two solutions. It's like one for everybody to be involved, no matter if like you're selling or you're buying food. 1% is possible for most people going to a restaurant, for example. It does make a change for the farmers. On the same side, we are bringing producers together with the restaurants, the canteens, the wholesalers to talk about how do we do things. So education and collective action is our solutions.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about what happens with the 1%? So I'm in your restaurant, okay. I have a great dinner, and I pay 1% to this Regen Ag concept. What happens?
Yeah, so of course it's a communication project. So any of our members, you will see in the menu card on their website that 1% is added to the bill. And then we put it into what we call the Restore Fund, right? And farmers can apply for funds to do all kind of regenerative projects. It can be composting projects. Maybe they want to test new crops. Maybe they want to try new holistic grazing methods while also producing delicious milk. One of our criteria is that they are already connected to hospitality. And then we, of course, bring them to meet hospitality because, as was mentioned, that is still a challenge for the producers to actually meet hospitality.
And another question. How come you stuck at 1%? Why not 2%?
I mean, as I said, we are right now located both in US and in Asia, and now also in the Nordics and Europe. 1% was what we came up with to begin with, and it sounds like very little, but it can really add up. And 1% is just like what everybody can do. So it could also be 10%, but just being from Denmark, for example, we are not used to adding things on the bill, for example, right? So I think 1% is a very good place to start. It's also it's just a way of starting many conversations and making all the other things that needs to happen, to be honest.
Okay. And it does add up.
It does add up.
Okay. Paul, can you give me a couple of your examples, please?
Yeah. Where do I start? So for us, we talked on it a bit earlier. I think in terms of moving the needle with regenerative agriculture, maybe reflecting a bit on the challenges in terms of the consumer and the price. One way you can do this more efficiently is leveraging the supply chain that's already there. Right, so we have farmers. If you think about a typical supply chain, so a farmer growing a certain product, selling it to a processor who sells it to a wholesaler who sells it to food service. Ultimately, it goes to the consumer. Along that chain, there's varying degrees of strength, right? So if you think of the financial strength of a Tesco relative to a financial strength of a farmer. Obviously, Tesco being much higher credit mark. You can leverage the strength in the existing supply chains to lend to farmers at a more efficient rate. Now, what that requires is collaboration of people coming together. In some cases, you're using existing platforms that are already established. In other cases, you need to think up clever ways of doing it. One example of which, not necessarily regenerative specifically, we would have seen Tesco, Waitrose, and Sainsbury, I think was the third retailer. They've made a commitment to sourcing deforestation-free soya. I forget the date by which they want to do that. In order to do that, obviously a lot of that supply comes from Brazil, where there's big issues with deforestation. And the farmers in Brazil have a legal right to continue to produce. And in some cases, there's a certain amount of additional land that they can deforest in order to grow that. So a program that we worked with those retailers is to put a financing in place for those farmers to not deforest the land, so to produce soy that's non-deforestation. They get an incentive there in terms of the lending rate that they would normally get vis-a-vis their financing, and they get that upfront pre-crop production, and it provides an incentive to the farmer. The only way that works is with collaboration. There's a number of people that come into that. You're leveraging the supply chain of the strength of the likes of Tesco, Sainsbury's, Waitrose, also some off-takers there in terms of processors who are involved, and there's blended finance. For those of you who don't know what blended finance is, basically capital that comes in to kind of do social good. The returns that they're looking for would be a lot less than, say, private equity or other financial investors. So using the supply chains that are there can tackle some of those difficulties, but that requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of people coming together and defining what they want to achieve. That's the way you're going to move the needle on this.
And the monitoring, so when you then apply that concept to Regen Ag, the monitoring of whether the farmer is meeting the Regen Ag targets, who does that?
So there's a company on the ground, I don't know if I can disclose their name, that goes around to farm, basically to check in that they're doing what they said they do. There's also monitoring tools that you can use in terms of, you got things like drones now that can go above and take pictures of the land. So it's becoming a lot easier to monitor rural areas than what it was in the past, satellite imagery, things like that as well.
And do you as Rabobank conduct that monitoring?
No,
or is
we
the
would
client
do that with a third-party provider. So we kind of stick to what we're good at in terms of the structuring, the financing side, and pushing the industry to a more sustainable level of production. But yeah, we just don't have the capabilities or the manpower. And again, for us, even in the UK, it's a wholesale offering. So portfolio of 6 billion. There's effectively within my immediate team, there's a much wider footprint here. There's 20 people controlling that. So that gives you the context of the FTE that we have in terms of demonstrating that. So we use other providers, and again, collaboration is key in terms of doing that and utilizing the expertise of others to get to where you want to go.
Okay, so that is potentially financial incentives for farmers to adopt Regen and transition into Regen.
It's financial incentive, but it's also, if you think about it, the off-takers, so we can talk a bit about the food service or the retailers, whatever the case may be, they need that supply. They've made commitments to it. So in order to lock in that supply, if you have a more dedicated relationship with those suppliers, bring them closer, it's a benefit for both parties in terms of not only price incentive, but locking in the supply. Like Mike is talking about availability. That's quite critical. If you can do these kind of initiatives and get closer to those suppliers, those relationships are further established and become embedded, become mutually beneficial to both sides.
I think that leads us on to Bob, actually, because you were talking about how you need to articulate this. And so your challenge was data, and you need to articulate it to the board. Can you talk about some of the solutions that you're encompassing?
Yeah, well, I do want to talk about a solution, but I think I probably just want to kind of plant an idea first, if that's all right. So the way that we articulate it, I think, really matters. And I think sometimes we articulate it as an emotional decision, and I think that's unhelpful. I've been an internal sustainability manager, and in my experience in talking with leadership, when they think this is an emotional decision, they think it's going to be a bad financial decision. So as soon as it's emotional, your figures have got to be doubly good. The other thing I think that it's worth just planting the seed of is when we go in with an emotional idea that this is in some way doing the right thing, I think we fundamentally miss the point. The point here is if the food system collapses or if we have severe problems within our food system, this is the food system's blockbuster moment. Blockbuster went bust because they didn't see Netflix coming. It wasn't just Blockbuster, it was all people who rented videos in kind of physical form. They didn't see the threat until it was too late. There were loads of analysts telling them the threat was there, but they didn't. They ignored it. In Blockbuster's case, actually, as the story goes, it was because they weren't prepared to let go of the 12% of their income that came from late fees. They were like, we're not changing the model, late fees is too important. And obviously we know the rest. There is plenty of narrative telling food companies, you need to change, there's change coming, climate change is going to interrupt our systems, if you don't change, you've got a problem. But are they changing fast enough? Question. Have many of them seen the problem coming? And if we express it as doing the right thing, rather than expressing it as this is a threat to your business, then we miss an opportunity to get them to think about this in a way that they're actually going to take action. So there you go. There's just a kind of an idea, a thought.
And okay, of the ones in your network, how many are actually properly looking at this and starting to change their supply chains?
So there are two questions in there. So how many are looking at it and how many are starting to change their supply chains? They're all looking at it. They all get it. Do they get it to the extent that they've got good enough data to be able to go, I see the extent of this threat? How many are starting to change their supply chains? That's really hard, especially, as Mike says, when there's problems in availability. So if there was loads of material out there at a reasonable price with data that suggested that this is the solution to the challenges that we have in front of us, then they would all be doing it already. So yes, they're interested. Yes, they're looking. Have they got all the answers? No, they haven't.
So what's your solution that you're going to bring to the table?
Actually, I mean, I think there's lots of challenges. Go on, Cindie.
I want to talk solutions. Jump in if you want, Cindie.
No, I'm going to wait then.
So I don't want to say that. I'm just going to tell you a story of one of the things that we're doing that I think brings some form of solution. So we're working with a number of pubs and brewers to understand the extent of risk that we're exposed to in the supply chain. So we've looked at risk that pubs and brewers face through a lens of TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and we've got a list of risks. Of those risks, the things that we think are our highest risks, our ability to produce barley and hops. So the next phase of the project now is to quantify those risks. So to what extent are we at risk of not being able to produce those things under different timelines, different scenarios of temperature change, different geographies, so that we can start to see, right, where are our risks and can we quantify that? The phase after that then is to look at what the potential interventions are and to quantify how effective they will be in reducing that risk. So we've got a quantified assessment of our risk across the sector. We've got a quantified assessment of the ability of the levers we have in front of us to reduce that risk. Then we can start making some really well-informed decisions at a system level, not just as individual businesses, about which levers we can pull and the effectiveness of those levers to build resilience and enable us to continue to operate.
Do you want to jump in now?
Can I just add one risk that now we're like going a little bit back? It's so interesting when we talk about all the risk on such a high level, because the only risk we have not talked about is actually the generational gap. Like we talk about all the goals we want to have, but who is going to farm in the future? I mean, as it looks right now, under 12% is under 40 years old in Europe. I mean, we can talk as long as we want about all these things, but we will not have any farmers growing our food if we don't start working with them and actually get them interested in this. So just for hospitality to know, it's like working with the farmers and getting them to transition, but also finding new farmers will be like what we need on a baseline before all this can actually happen.
Very good point, Cindie. Thank you. Yeah, we need that. Mike?
That actually links in really nicely with I've got a few solutions. So the first one is probably the most, it sounds really, really simple, but it's a long way from being simple. And that's just joining the dots. Actually joining the dots between caterers, hospitality providers, wholesalers, farmers, producers. Let's get everyone in a room and let's sort it out. And I just don't think that really happens at the moment. And I don't think there's an awful lot of conversation. And I know we don't, there is an example, I mentioned it earlier. So for example, Wild Farmed, that's a really good model and it's really worked. Actually, we've got the farmers, producers, we understand what that's about, we understand the why. We understand we can get it to a wholesaler, we can get it into our business, and they support our business through road shows and all sorts of, and it really works brilliantly. There are other opportunities, but actually, that's going to be a challenge. The other thing that it touches on is the communication, is maybe we need to stop talking about cost and start talking about value. And actually, when we start talking about value, we're not only talking about that, that covers a whole gambit. So that covers everything from, the main outcomes of regenerative, the nutrition, the soil quality, the biodiversity, etc. Not looking just down the carbon, the carbon tunnel vision. Not just that, but actually the whole thing. And actually, one of the things that we really like is actually looking at holistic, sustainable diets. So actually, it's looking at the opportunity to bring in health and carbon, people and planet. And that's what really captures the imagination of our clients and our customers.
So are you making any supply chain purchases on that?
No, absolutely. So I don't want to keep banging on about Wild Farm, but I'll give that as a really good example.
Give us another one.
Our oils. So we're actually working with Hamish, and we're buying. We buy regeneratively farmed rapeseed oil. We're working with ethical Boucher. We're working with the Lake District farmers, which is an interesting one, because actually that brings into another question. Actually, and it was touched on earlier around definition. So actually, what's regenerative? Now, all of us in this room, we probably know the 6 key principles, including context of regenerative agriculture. The customers don't. They haven't got a clue. They hear this term bandied about, and it sounds cool. And unless you actually have something that's fairly robust in terms of structure, and I don't mean certification, I mean a grading, a bit like Euro NCAP, in your cars or whatever, for safety. But actually, then we're opening ourselves up to greenwash. Because a customer or a producer or a caterer will start, we use all these regenerative products. Well, what do you mean by that? We don't really know what that actually means. And that is absolutely critical to helping the customer understand the why. And in the communication, I think the why is absolutely crucial, and that plays into the talking about value rather than just cost. This is why we're doing it, because of the main outcomes, because it's supporting biodiversity, resilience against climate change, looks after water, looks after it's better health because the nutrient density in regenerative product is generally higher. So all of those things together is part of the communication.
Mike, this is a tough question, but I have to ask it.
You're not sorry though, are you?
No. What % of your supply chain are you able to say is regenerative at the moment?
Well, as I just said, the challenge is definition. I would probably say, in terms of what we would view as regenerative, in terms of the 6 key principles, I would say probably less than 1%. But it would be it's very hard to quantify, because what's regenerative?
And as an eternal optimist, because I get the feeling you probably are, take that into consideration. But where do you think you could be, and by when?
It depends on availability, depends on the route to market. Yeah. But I would like to think, 40% in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Thank you. And how many meals do you serve a day?
We cater for 2.6 million people a day. That's not all meals, that's cups of coffee, that might be a glass of champagne, might be a sandwich, whatever, but about 2.6 million.
40% in 5 to 10 years of 2.6 million.
A lot.
Okay.
I definitely think that the opportunity is enormous.
Okay. Max, did I ask you about solutions?
Not yet.
Go for it. I think you're the last one. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then we'll move on to...
I guess I'll blend in a little bit of
questions.
opportunities here. And I think the food service space is quite interesting. You think about traditional packaged food, retail. If they're going to do something with regenerative, it's going to come with a premiumization strategy, trying to get better margins of it. Now, if you think about your classic fast food restaurant, burgers, chicken, chips, hot dogs, you can't do that. You can't just start saying my burgers are regenerative. Maybe you can if you're a very small one, but the mainstream ones, they can't do that. So we're starting to hear more from them that it's a strategy about resilience. And I think in the past 2-3 years, that's become quite a common word, trying to understand how do we build resilience to climate change in the extremes and the price volatility that we're seeing on a lot of soft commodities. So that's the first one. The second one I would talk about is the data. Bob mentioned it, but we're seeing so much incredible data come up in the last 2 years where we know exactly what's happening on a farm, whether it's through measurements, satellite data, drones, whatever that exists. And there's also lots of organizations working to bring that up to the company level so that companies can actually discuss with their stakeholders, investors, local regulators, and so on, what positive impact they're actually having. And what that enables is really more collaboration, where you have more institutions and more companies and local initiatives that can come together. And I think traditionally in the UK, the supermarkets have led that. I know you asked me what percentage is directly sourced by those supermarkets. I can't find that figure. If anyone has it, I'd love it. But yeah, supermarkets are very involved. And they're coming together a lot more with aggregators as well. And what that enables is that if you're a restaurant or a food caterer and so on, there's an opportunity for you to come in there and benefit from the relationship that these people already have with farmers that probably supply different businesses as well. So I think to me that data is a huge opportunity and a huge solution to the problems that we're seeing.
Thank you. Right, we're opening up to the floor because officially we've only got 10 minutes left. So, gosh, hands are flying up. Who's got the roving mic, please? Is there anybody? Excellent. We'll grab guy in the red and then the woman in the white. Please, can you stand up? And if you're at the back, you're going to have to come forward. Otherwise, we can't hear you, I think.
Somehow I knew Nick would have a question.
Yes, sorry. Hi, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Nick Hughes. I'm a freelance journalist. Actually, I'm delighted that Mike said the word nutrition because I was looking down the framework at the very start of these outcomes sought by companies waiting to see improved human health, and was slightly surprised that it was missing. And to me, there is no sustainable food system without good health, good nutrition, along with all these other factors. And I feel like I've heard a lot over the last 2 days from farmers talking how proud they are about producing nutrient-dense food, but much less about how we ensure that food is consumed by people before potentially it's processed into something less healthy. So I think Mike sort of answered my question already in terms of your interest in supporting good nutrition, but perhaps Bob, in terms of your members, I mean, is one of their motivations for supporting regenerative agriculture supporting good human nutrition as well as positive environmental outcomes?
Yes, 100%. It will always come into the conversation. So as a buyer, we were having this conversation earlier, as a buyer, you're looking at price, availability and quality. Nutrition comes into that equation. Is it the number one factor? I don't think it is. But is it important to those businesses? Absolutely it is. They are looking at the quality of the produce they provide, but they're also looking at whether or not their customers will buy it. We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And so the challenge for those operators at the moment is maintaining quality at an affordable price.
But a great question. And it's saved me asking Max one at the end. Right, woman at the back with the yellow shirt. And then we're going over that side. Apologies.
Thank you very much for the talk. This is a question about business modelling. At the beginning, there was a comment about agile businesses. Farmers have to regenerate the 6 different principles. They have to maybe wait quite a few years for profit. What are the regenerative principles of decision-making in business modelling within the sort of hospitality sector? How do they differ from a degenerative business decisions? That's a kind of question. And are they different to kind of 1980s modelling? That's it.
Who wants to take that one?
That's a deeply philosophical question. I think Mike's getting ready for it.
Whoa. I think Bob can... No. I mean, it's a great question. I don't think there's been any sort of conscious decision to change the modelling. It's as a result of the demands of the business. So actually, if you ask the CFO which way the company should go, I'm sure they'll have a very different view to me, for example. And actually, one of the things that we're doing is we're pushing and pulling with our customers. So we're responding to what they want, but we're also nudging them in the right direction, or what we would like to think is the right direction, that will actually help drive sales and drive profitability in our business. Ultimately, that's what we're here to do. We're hospitality providers. But actually, we're also moving with the Groundswell. Sorry. of opinion in terms of actually trying to get us to a point where we are delivering holistic, sustainable diets. That includes nutrition. That includes, so actually one of the things we've been looking at for quite a long time now is carbon labeling, for example, on our menu items. And now actually we're thinking, well, maybe that's a bit too much information. Customers just want to know we've got it. And they want to trust us. And they want to know that where we're at. And actually we're providing that, which then delivers the modelling. So that might be a bit of a ask about face where I'm answering it, but hopefully I have.
I'd like to see if Max has got anything. Having assessed these companies in your report, did you see any shift or the likelihood of a shift in the way they're being governed? Or is it just the ESG?
I think the ESG is bigger still. And I think to me, what this begs, I guess I'm just going to ask the question in a slightly different way, is about product design, in this case, formulation. And I feel like a lot of companies are trying to plug what they're already doing within the vocabulary of regenerative agriculture. And they're not rethinking, what am I going to sell? What products can I come with that really support that business model and that value chain? And I think that sort of thinking is still lacking in the same way that, if you're trying to stick a battery in the engine front of a car, it's probably not as efficient as rethinking how you design a car around the battery.
Well, maybe that's an opportunity for you, Bob. Do
Can
some training with your members.
Well, I think actually, if I can try and answer the question for you, capitalism in the days of Adam Smith was all around, if there is a need in the market, then businesses will spring up to provide for that need. That was the idea, that capitalism would drive innovation in the market so that people would get what they needed. I think it's evolved a little bit. And capitalism now doesn't necessarily respond to a need. Much of it creates a need in order to sell a product, in order to make a profit. And sadly, that's where capitalism is today. Businesses are all about, can I continue to make a profit? But what I would say is, on the more positive side of things, is I think it's evolving. So even as little as 10 years ago, when you spoke about being sustainable or ESG, that was all about a moral responsibility and an ethical responsibility. I think there is much, much better understanding today that being moral and ethical in the way that you undertake your business can be hugely successful for your business. There's loads of really good evidence that purpose-driven businesses that explicitly state a purpose beyond making money, are far more successful at making money than those who don't. So whilst we live in that capitalist system that still exists just to make money, we know that being responsible and purposeful within that system is more likely to make you more successful. And that's an emerging idea that I think is gathering quite a lot of pace.
And I'd actually go a lot further, which is the climate emergency that we are in means that companies are having to address the resilience of their supply chains.
100%.
Can we go to the woman who's been very insistent with her hand, please? Oh, okay. Can you stand up, please, and wait for the mic? Thank you.
I was quite interested in what you just said about Adam Smith, and because it was based on truth, and capitalism won't work without the truth behind it. So that is a major flaw in how Adam Smith's theory of the market has continued. And we've talked a lot about greenwash, which is really interesting. And I was quite interested in Rabobank, the beginning, as you pitched yourself. I thought, oh God, that's interesting. I looked you up on Wikipedia. So how do you marry investing in regenerative farming with spending £1.4 billion on deforestation in Brazil between 2015 and 2023, which, you have NGOs, Greenpeace, XR, all holding you to account for this. So I'm interested in how you marry that. And the way you've slightly pitched it that, you're really supporting preventing deforestation when actually you've been a major funder of it in the Amazon.
Well, I won't go into too much detail in terms of the specifics of that because I don't know and I can't speak for the organization. I work for the company
20 people, that's what you just
based
said.
in the UK.
Yeah.
Look, I will say this, Rabobank has a conscience, one of the first organizations to produce a climate report going back to 1992. We take our responsibilities very seriously. All the clients that we bank, we look at them from an ESG perspective, we rate them. There are clients that we don't bank because of their ESG considerations. So like any organization, we're not perfect. I don't know the specifics of that case in terms of what you're referencing there, but
really should know about it. It's really important. Deforestation in the Amazon is the absolute core.
yeah, and we take it quite seriously. Like I said, we are doing what we can in terms of that element, and also the deforestation initiative, we take that quite seriously. And if you kind of look up online what Rabobank does and some of the policies and procedures, you're getting one side of the equation there as well. So I'd encourage you maybe to expand that to others.
Can I just say, you do raise a very interesting point, which is truth, which is well, there's greenwash, and the topic here is discussing greenwash within the desire for the hospitality industry to embrace regenerative agriculture, and how do they do that without greenwashing. As we've heard, there's a huge appetite for embracing regenerative agriculture, but there seem to be immense blockages in the supply chain at the moment. But the key point that I'm bringing out isn't greenwashing. I'm bringing out truth from your question. And I think that's a really important point here. And that's why I said to Mike, I'm going to ask you this. He says, you're not going to be sorry for it. And I'm not going to be sorry for it. But he also wasn't ashamed to say it. And that is really important. We need to be truthful. Everybody needs to be truthful, and the corporates in particular. But likewise, we mustn't bash them. If they are only getting 1% of their supply chain in Regen Ag, at least it's 1% and they are trying. And it's up to everybody to come together collaboratively to try and work through the blockages and challenges that are there. More questions, please. Apologies, Cindie, quickly.
Yeah, can I just say something also, because now when we talk about hospitality and food corporations, what is Regen Ag, what is the definition, and so on. For me, this is super important that also in hospitality, food corporations, that we have a transparency in the framework of how we understand things. I don't think it's super important that we have definitions ready, but how are you looking at Regen Ag? Like, what is your stand about fertilizers, agrochemicals? What is your stand on it? What is your stand on the principles? So I do think we can come a long way of being transparent in the framework, right? Being really transparent, because it's not transparent when we can't read about where things are going. And when we can't read about food corporations, are they against or for agrochemicals? I mean, when you read sustainability reports right now, I can't see that. So I want more transparency in where you stand in the Regen Ag principles.
And on that note, Foodprint Nordic have got a great set of your standards around Regen Ag. Yeah. Questions? Gentleman there, and then a lady there, please. We have come to time, by the way, so if anyone wants to leave, you can, but we're staying here answering questions.
Yep. I just had a question kind of with this 74% and 42% for anybody on the panel. Everything above the bottom one relies on farmers. So I'm just kind of interested, how do you see a world where anything happens if farmer incomes and other economic factors relating to agriculture doesn't improve? Because at the end of the day, why people are leaving farms is that the gross margins on farms are between 1% to 3%, whereas majority of industries you work in probably operate at gross margins above 20%. So just curious how we do any of that without that part.
Do you want to go?
I was just going to say that having done this analysis from a sort of top-down point of view without knowing anything about Regen Ag, that was my main conclusion as well. So really hope we can figure out the answers to that.
But you were asking for this financial aspect, right? Yeah. Or? Yeah, but as I said also in the previous panel, is like we're trying to change agriculture, which means we need to change the whole financial system and how everything is set up right now. Comes from investment to like incentives to subsidies, everything around it for actually to foster farmers' economy, right? I'm just saying it's like there's so many things on the financial aspect that we need to talk about and change.
We had another hand. The lady over there with the sunglasses, and then a woman in the hat.
Oh, okay, cool. Hi, I'm Jess Latchford. I run a company called Waste Not, and we work with WSH across the board. And just massive thank you to you, Mike, for your support. We supply surplus fruit and veg from regenerative growers into, at the moment, Baxter Story sites, but we're spreading out within the WSH family. So thank you for your support. I was just going to ask if, more to your point about getting the collective of growers farmers, those with feet on the ground, and those making decisions about how we get more produce into your sites, if we could possibly do some more focus groups, and how we can really talk about how we can make a difference. I sit in the middle of agriculture and hospitality, and we provide to lots of food service caterers. You guys have been amazing, by the way. Like, the support, I cannot tell you, they are incredible. But if we can sit down and properly, like what you said before about there are kind of, I don't want to say echo chambers, but that sort of feeling about groups that are taking part about these topics. If we can bring more people from wider, diverse aspects of the industry all together to talk, I think that would be really beneficial.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you. Good suggestion. And there was a woman here in the hat. It's probably going to be our last question, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks to the panel.
Stand up, please. Thank you.
Thank you to the panel. It's been a really good discussion, and I'm Diana Spellman, and I run a procurement agency called Partners in Purchasing, which has been value-led about premium products and connecting farm to fork. And as Mike aptly described, whilst we've been making huge efforts over the years to try and bring as much produce into hospitality as possible, there are so many barriers in this supply chain, and they are largely financial. But on the point of transparency that was brought up, and I can feel that there's a lot of anger in the room, and whether that's obvious or not, some of the questions that have been asked demonstrate the legacy of the wrongdoings that have happened since 1920, since we've had this agricultural revolution. So in terms of transparency, do we really need to be angry and totally transparent about all the factors that have taken place? Does the consumer really need to know that their produce has been totally devoid or diminished of nutrition? Do we need to really delve into all the wrongs before we can actually move forward? Or are we just going to get bogged down in a lot of anger?
Can I take that?
Yep.
Thank you, Diana. I mentioned it earlier, the idea of holistic, sustainable diets, nutrition, everything, but also one of the things that I think fundamentally is to the customer, or not all. This is not true to say for all customers, but a lot of customers, they don't want to know how the sausage is made. They just want to know it's really good, and they want to trust us and all of us to know that it is high welfare, it's well made, it's got great nutritional quality, it's got the right ingredients, etc., etc. They want to trust us. When you buy a car, from Volvo, you want to know it's safe, but you don't need to know how big the airbag is and how tense all the bits and pieces. You just need to know they've got it. So actually, I think that's a large part of it. So I think we can give them too much information. We need to be absolutely transparent and honest and have absolute integrity, otherwise we'll lose trust. And go, yeah, it wasn't great before, but we've turned the corner. We need to do what Rishi Sunak's doing and saying it's all about the future and forget the past.
Oh, I thought we'd managed to get through a panel without reference to this. Okay, I'm going to draw it to a close. And in doing that, I'm going to give each panelist 30 seconds to give you guys in the room their last thoughts. Thanks. Max, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think to me, I would just come back to the collaboration and the potential of collaboration across a supply chain and supply shed. To me, that's the most impactful thing that can happen, is how you really drive change. And it really connects the local initiatives with the global investors, from my perspective, but also corporations and so on. And the last thing that I would say is that, in my experience of engaging investors and companies on these topics, is that they very much represent society. You always have people who are really committed to the cause within these organizations, and you have a large segment of them that really don't care. So it's really a work of, like we are doing in society, of getting people on board with these things.
Thanks, Max. Paul?
Yeah, I'll probably echo a bit what Max says. I think it's a bit of a journey in terms of what we're on, and I liken it a bit to if you go back maybe 20, 30 years ago, in terms of the idea of drink driving being acceptable. That's largely changed. There's an education that goes along with that. Look, we can kind of point fingers and look at things, and you're not going to make progress with that. I think I agree fully, transparency and trust need to be an integral part of that. but it does need to work together, and collaboration is key in terms of getting from A to B.
Okay. Cindie.
Yeah, the last thing for today, I think overall common sense. I think what is like also when we talk about Regen Ag is like, let's go back to common sense and a bigger picture sometimes. We talk a lot about carbon. For me, it's like while our oceans are also dying due to nitrogen runoffs. I mean, there's so many things. I really feel we need to zoom out a little bit and really work with more common sense in the space too. Just overall.
Mike?
I was going to say collaboration, so thanks, guys. I would say all working together, joining those dots up. All the stakeholders getting in a room, and let's get this show on the road.
Bob?
Yeah, I think the thing that sticks with me from the conversation we've had is Mike's 1% today to 40% in 5 or 10 years. That's a tremendous shift. And there's a few barriers we'll need to take down. There's some systemic issues we're going to need to resolve as we go on that. So there's a lot of work to do. I completely agree collaboration is the way to do that. But I think there's a sweet spot of collaboration of doing it at just the right size, just the right time, just the right way. And not it's going to be really difficult to get that right. There's a long way to go.
Can I just add to that, just very quickly? I absolutely agree with that. I mean, one of the things I'd say in terms of that leap from 1% to 40% is that we're extremely fortunate. We have an extremely flexible business. We've got 18 businesses, all different. And we have, in the vast majority of cases, we have complete control over menus and what we're buying and where we're buying it from. For a lot of organizations, such as your Nando's and your McDonald's, etc., that's a lot tougher. Because actually you're much, much more restricted. Although when you do make the change, it could be far bigger, but actually we have the opportunity to make small changes in small places and then grow it.
Well, can we put our hands together and thank the panelists and thank you, the audience.